welcome to the movie on metabolism and energetics. So you've probably heard the term metabolism before, as in some people have a high metabolism or a low metabolism, but what does that really mean? Metabolism is what you do with the nutrients after you digest them, which we learned about in the last chapter, or another definition is all the chemical reactions that are happening inside your cells. And there's two basic types of reactions. We have catabolism, which is breaking things down, so we'll eat things and they'll be absorbed into our blood, and then depending on what we need we can break them down, and this provides energy. That's catabolism. And the other type is anabolism. This is creating new organic molecules, so for example taking amino acids and combining them to form proteins. This is responsible for maintenance and repairs, growth, secretion, and storage of nutrient reserves. So we have something in our cells called metabolic turnover. So this is the maintenance. Cells are continuously breaking down and replacing all their organic components. So for example, the mitochondria in your cells, after a while they will get broken down and replaced by new ones. And all the organelles except for the nucleus do that. We don't replace our DNA. And all of the cell's organic building blocks or nutrients form what's called a nutrient pool. This nutrient pool can be used for energy production or for making new organic components. So inside the mitochondria, nutrients can be broken down for energy. 60% of this is lost as heat. 40% is stored as ATP and used for cell functions. And cells get most of their ATP from the electron transport system, which is linked to the citric acid cycle. Both of these happen inside the mitochondria, and we're going to take a closer look at them. So this is the citric acid cycle. 2 carbon fragments, so the sugars will be absorbed and broken down into 2 carbon or 3 carbon fragments. Acetyl-CoA is the starting point for the citric acid cycle. And as they go through this, electrons are removed, and those electrons are storing energy. And those electrons are carried by NAD and FAD. And also in this process, ATP is produced, carbon dioxide is produced. And it's really the energy that's stored in the bonds of these molecules that we're trying to release. The FAD and the NAD are going to go to the electron transport chain. And here's a look at the electron transport chain. And as the electrons move down these proteins, they lose a little bit of energy at each step. And that energy is used to pump hydrogen ions through this membrane. And then we get a big buildup of hydrogen ions inside this. The final electron acceptor is oxygen, so that's the whole reason we breathe, is to get oxygen to accept electrons from the electron transport chain. And then these hydrogen ions are going to diffuse through this pump here, and as they do that, that powers the production of ATP. And then those hydrogen ions will combine with this oxygen to form water. So that's how we make energy in our cells. Now cells can break down any available substrate from the nutrient pool to obtain the energy they need. So we can break down fatty acids, glucose, or amino acids. We prefer fatty acids and glucose. Nutrients are going to be absorbed and they're sent through the blood to the cells for their immediate use or for storage. So the nutrients will be sent to wherever there's a need. If we're exercising, if we're running a race, that need is going to be in the muscles in our legs. And if we don't have a need, we'll send it to adipocytes for storage. And cells contain enzymes which can convert one nutrient into whatever type the cell needs. So some of the basic nutrients are the fatty acids, the glucose, and the amino acids. So fatty acids can be stored as triglycerides, or they can be broken down into 2 carbon chains and sent to the citric acid cycle, and they're broken down for energy. Glucose can be stored as glycogen, or it also can be broken down for energy. Amino acids form proteins, and they can be used for energy if needed, but that's a thin line because we don't use them for energy unless we absolutely have to. Carbohydrates like glucose are the preferred energy source under resting conditions. And carbohydrates, they travel through the digestive system, and they're broken down into smaller and smaller pieces, and their digestion is really finished in the small intestine by what are called brush border enzymes. And so they're broken down into simple sugars, which are absorbed and then converted to glucose as needed. And the liver helps us to maintain our blood glucose levels. We want these to be about 90 milligrams per deciliter. Glucose can also be broken down for energy, and we get 36 molecules of ATP for each glucose that we break down. And if we have excess glucose, such as right after a meal, we can store it in our muscles as glycogen. And if we want to use glucose for energy, we have to go through the process called glycolysis. That's the first step in the catabolism or breakdown of glucose. So first, glucose is converted into 2 pyruvate molecules. So now it's 2 3-carbon chains. It started out as a 6-carbon ring. And then it goes through these steps to produce 2 pyruvate molecules. And as part of this, we actually produce 2 ATP, which the cells can use. Glucose is the primary energy source for cells because it's very small, it's soluble, easily distributed through the body fluids. Glycolysis, which we're seeing right here, can provide a small amount of ATP without oxygen anaerobically. Also, glucose can be efficiently stored as glycogen, and the breakdown of glycogen occurs very quickly and involves only a single step. And the mobilization of other intracellular reserves, such as lipids, involves more complex pathways and takes more time. So that's why we prefer glucose. And this shows how we're going to produce the 36 ATP, 2 from glycolysis. Most of it is going to come from the electron transport chain. So next, let's talk about lipids. Lipids are absorbed into the lacteals, and they're surrounded by bile, and they form what's called a chylomicron. It's this lipid droplet surrounded by bile, which breaks it down into smaller pieces. So again, this shows the lipids. They're absorbed into the lacteals. They eventually make it to the blood, and in the liver, they form these chylomicrons. The fatty acids can also enter adipocytes. And they can be used to produce triglycerides for storage. Cholesterol can be carried by LDLs or HDLs. LDLs are going to take cholesterol from the blood out to the tissues. HDL then is going to take cholesterol from the tissues back to the liver, and it's recycled. HDL is considered the good cholesterol. This shows how fatty acids can be broken down. So they're broken. This is a triglyceride, and it will be broken down into the fatty acids and the glycerol molecule. And here's a fatty acid, and they're broken down. 2 carbon fragments are broken off one at a time, and then those are sent to the citric acid cycle. So normally they're broken down into ATP. They can also be, this shows how they can be converted into other lipids as needed, like we might need cholesterol or phospholipids for making cell membranes. Next we'll talk about protein digestion. So again, protein digestion into amino acids is completed by brush border enzymes, just like carbohydrates. And from that we get amino acids. Amino acids are used to produce new proteins, or they can be broken down for energy, or this shows how we can make amino acids, or sometimes we can convert amino acids. This is showing glutamic acid being converted to tyrosine, so they can be converted to different amino acids. And this shows how amino acids can be broken down for energy. Alright, there are 2 general patterns of metabolic activity. You have the absorptive state, where cells are absorbing nutrients and storing them. So this is right after a meal. All of our nutrient levels are going to be pretty high. Lipids are high. Glucose is going to be high. So at this point we're building up our glycogen reserves, we're building up our triglyceride reserves, we're doing any growth. So at this point the anabolic pathways are predominant in the absorptive state, and then if it's been a while since you've eaten, you're in the post-absorptive state. And in this case the catabolic pathways are predominant, so we're breaking things down to get energy. Vitamins are essential nutrients because they serve as coenzymes in many reactions. And they are important for different metabolic pathways. The fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. These can be found in vegetables. They're absorbed with lipid digestion products, and they are stored in the body. The water-soluble vitamins are B and C. Vitamin B is found in meat, eggs, dairy. Vitamin C is found in fruits. These are absorbed with water, and they're not stored in the body. And your proper nutrition depends on eating a balanced diet. And now we have myplate.gov, which just shows if you eat half fruits and vegetables, you're probably doing good. The amount of calories in each food is important to know. Not all foods are equal, so this shows how much energy you get from carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. So lipids contain the most calories, which makes them good for storing energy. Not good for eating. Alright, there are 2 types of amino acids. We have essential amino acids, which cannot be produced by our bodies, so that means we have to get them through our diet. Animal proteins contain, animal products like meat will contain complete proteins. Plants contain incomplete proteins. So if you're a vegetarian, you have to make sure that you get all the essential amino acids you need, and you can do that pretty easily just by eating beans and rice. There are some metabolic disorders. These can result from nutritional or biochemical problems. Usually it's a nutritional problem. Eating disorders are psychological problems that result in inadequate or excessive food consumption. This picture here is someone with anorexia, which is the lack or loss of appetite, and that does not look healthy. In bulimia, large meals are followed by induced vomiting, and so that a person with bulimia might also look like this picture. Another problem is obesity. Obesity is being 20% over your ideal weight, because this is where health risks start to appear. Most obesity is called regulatory obesity, which results from a failure to regulate food intake. It just means you eat too much. Elevated cholesterol levels can lead to atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease. You'll have these plaques start to build up in your blood vessels, and that leads to high blood pressure and all kinds of problems. In phenylketonuria, individuals cannot convert the amino acid phenylalanine to the amino acid tyrosine. This is necessary for the production of neurotransmitters. This will lead to brain damage if it's not detected. In protein deficiency disease, the individuals cannot get enough amino acids in their diet, and protein synthesis decreases throughout the body. And we need proteins for everything, so this leads to lots of problems. This is an individual with kwashiorkor. It occurs in children whose protein intake is not adequate, and this can damage the developing brains. Ketoacidosis is when our glucose supplies are limited. Fatty acids and amino acids can be broken down, and ketone bodies will be produced, and this will lower the pH of the blood. If your uric acid concentration gets too high, these insoluble crystals may form. This leads to gout. So those are some disorders. Next, we're going to talk about energetics and thermal regulation. So this person is doing a test to, looks like they're monitoring their heart, but they're also trying to monitor their metabolism. So the amount of energy a person is using can be measured by measuring their oxygen consumption. That's what this mask is doing. And the amount of energy that a person uses is going to depend on their size as well as their activity level. You can see resting, you're not using very many calories per hour. If you're swimming, you're using a lot. The control of appetite is very complex, and if you can figure this out, I'm sure you'd win a Nobel Prize and be rich. Some things that we know: we have a feeding center, which is right here, that stimulates appetite, and we have a satiety center very near it. The satiety center is going to suppress appetite. These are both located in the hypothalamus. The feeding center is stimulated by several neurotransmitters and also the hormone ghrelin. So if you could figure out a way to stop ghrelin production, you could maybe help people lose weight, but so far we haven't figured it out. The satiety center is stimulated by elevated blood glucose levels, also hormones from the digestive tract, and stretch receptors along the digestive tract. Another thing that our body works to regulate is temperature. We're always trying to maintain a constant temperature. And heat is produced by cellular respiration. Remember, we said 60% of the energy produced, or 60% of the energy produced by breaking down glucose is lost as heat. It's lost by radiation, convection, evaporation, and conduction. If our body temperature is not maintained, there are very severe consequences. If it gets too high or too low, it will lead to death. Temperature changes are coordinated by the heat loss center and the heat gain center in the hypothalamus. When our body temperature increases, as we can see here, we get into the shade or into water to reduce our body temperature. we're going to send more blood to the skin. You can see the blood is now in the superficial blood vessels instead of the deep blood vessels. This makes your skin appear reddish. It also increases heat loss by radiation and convection. We will also stimulate our sweat glands to sweat more. That's going to increase heat loss by evaporation. We also breathe deeper. This causes more heat loss through the lungs. And when our body temperature falls, we release hormones that will increase the metabolic rate of all tissues, so that's going to cause all our tissues to produce more heat. We shiver, which will increase heat production by muscles. And we reduce blood flow to the skin. Now the blood is going into the deeper blood vessels, not the superficial ones, so we lose less heat that way. And that is how we maintain our temperature.